Good evening. My name is Mark Mamagonian. I should mention I am the Director of Academic Affairs at the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research, NASAR, and I welcome you to tonight's conversation with Bedross Der Matossian, editor of the recent volume just shown, Denial of Genocides in the 21st Century, published by the University of Nebraska Press. Tonight's program is being presented as part of the Nasser Kalust Gulbenkian Foundation series on contemporary Armenian issues and is co-sponsored by the Society for Armenian Studies. We thank the Gulbenkian Foundation for their ongoing support, and we thank SAS as well for partnering with us on this program and so many other programs this year and in previous years and in the future. This is a contemporary topic, even though the Armenian genocide happened over a century ago, and some of the other genocides in the volume may have happened in the historical past. Denial of genocide is something that is happening in the 21st century, no matter when the genocide took place. Almost all of us tonight who are attending this webinar or participating in it as panelists are doing so with a very heavy weight on us. Already when the program was scheduled a while back, it was with the knowledge that the situation in Artsakh was already bad. It was already what looked like a slow motion genocide taking place and has been taking place since the blockade cut off the Lachin corridor last December, but probably for longer than that. In other words, it was always going to be difficult to go ahead and do this program tonight, and the events of yesterday and today have made it that much harder, but possibly also more pressing that we do so. None of us tonight on the panel who are the speaking labors under the illusion that our discussion of genocide denial in the 21st century, however intrinsically it is related to yesterday's attack, is really going to change what is happening. And yet, I think, and I don't want to put words into the mouths of my colleagues here, it is important that these issues be discussed. There will be other upcoming programs that either deal directly or indirectly with the ongoing assault on Artsakh. I don't want to go into further details now because we have a lot to cover tonight. Please get on the Nasser email list and the SAS email list, or follow us on social media. Or go to our website. There's lots of ways to know what's going on. Before introducing our speaker tonight, I would like to invite our friend and colleague, Christina Moranci, who is, of course, the Mashtots Chair in Armenian Studies at Harvard, as well as the president of the Society for Armenian Studies, to say a few words. Christina.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you for having me. I want to begin by joining my voice to so many others around the globe who have condemned the Azerbaijani attack on Artsakh and are horrified by the specter of a second Armenian genocide. Professor Der Matossian's new book, Denial of Genocides in the 21st Century, published with University of Nebraska Press, could not be more timely. This volume contains essays by leading scholars working on a range of cases from the Tutsi, the Khmer Rouge, and indigenous people in the United States, importantly centering Armenia, including an excellent essay by our own Mark Mamagonian. This volume is exactly the kind of scholarship that we need to help make sense of what is happening, not just in the past, but right now, and also to assign it to students and friends as required reading. And I'm so grateful to Bedross for this critical contribution to the scholarship. And so on behalf of the SAS and from the current president to the former president, I thank you for everything you are doing, both in your service to the field of Armenian studies and to the Armenian community. So thank you.
Thanks, Christina. Amen. Following the presentation on the book by Bedross, we will engage in some discussion among ourselves on some points we have already kicked around in pre-event discussions before opening up to audience questions. Let me note for audience members, please use the Zoom Q&A to post your questions. And although there's a lot of things on everybody's mind relating to everything, but particularly to what's going on right now, please focus your questions on issues relating to denial, which is our main topic tonight. Dr. Bedross Der Matossian is professor of modern Middle East history and is the Hyman Rosenberg Professor in Judaic Studies at the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. He is the author of The Horrors of Adana, Revolution and Violence in the Early 20th Century, and Shattered Dreams of Revolution, From Liberty to Violence in the Late Ottoman Empire, as well as many important scholarly articles published in leading journals. Denial of genocides in the 21st century is perhaps, with last year's collection, Denial, the Final Stage of Genocide, published by Routledge, among the first volumes to present comparative analytical perspectives on denial of multiple genocides, as Christina described, which is ironic, perhaps, since denial is one thing that is common, in fact, to all genocides. Bedross is past president of the Society for Armenian Studies, as well as a former board member of Nasser, and he's a current member of Nasser's Academic Advisory Committee. And our work together goes back more than 15 years, and it is a pleasure, even on such a difficult day, to say welcome to Bedross and to turn the program over to him. Bedross.
First of all, thank you, Mark. Thank you for Nasser. Thank you, Christina. Thank you for SAS for organizing and co-sponsoring this event. It comes at a very grim day today, as all of us know what's happening. The major question today is what's going to happen in the future. What's the fate of 120,000 Armenians who are in hostage today under the despotic Aliyev's regime? So the book deals with the denial of genocides in 21st century. I wanted to take a comparative approach to understanding what is denial, how denial takes place, and what is unique about the 21st century denial of different genocides of the past, past centuries. Of course, the volume does not encompass all denials of genocides that existed in the modern period or pre-modern period. These are just examples of genocides written by leading scholars in the field. And of course, some people would ask me why 3 chapters on the Armenian genocide. I'll argue that Armenian genocide represents the most sophisticated denialist approach orchestrated by the Turkish state with all its apparatus. So Gregory Stanton, for example, argues that denial is the last stage of genocide. It starts with classification, symbolization, persecution, followed by extermination. It starts with classification, symbolization, discrimination, dehumanization, organization, polarization, perpetration, persecution, extermination, and final denial. Denial, the perpetrators of later generations deny the existence of any crime. However, I disagree with this classification, and I follow Talin Sujian approach in this volume. She has a fantastic article. She puts it succinctly in the first line of her chapter in this volume, and she says, and I quote, "The decision to deny genocide is embedded in the decision to carry it out." The decision to deny a genocide is embedded in the decision to carry out. Every scholar has their own approach as to what genocide denial is. I'm going to quote my approach, read my approach to what the denial of genocide is. Denial is not only the reluctance to acknowledge the historical injustices of the past, but it further aims at killing the dead and their memory over and over, inflicting pain on the survivors and their descendants, and demonstrating that future acts of violence are possible in a climate of deception and impunity. By denying genocide, states and non-state actors become complicit in the process of genocide, transmuting the violence from the physical to the psychological plane. Denials become ideological as well as biological descendants of the perpetrators. They continue the process of genocide denial through print and audiovisual media, the desecration of genocide monuments, and the exertion of pressure on different governments in order to prevent the use of the forbidden word, genocide. Genocide denial it's an art. It's an art itself. The art of genocide denial has also evolved and adapted to keep pace, developing new strategies to augment and complement established modes of denial. It has encompassed a range of techniques, including disputes over numbers, contestation of legal and sociological definitions, meaning genocide. We cannot use genocide for the native populations or the Armenian genocide because genocide was not coined at the time. Sometimes blaming the victims, cover-ups, and various modes of intimidation, including threats of legal action. As a matter of fact, Mark has an excellent article, the ways in which denialists use the medium of court in order to score their victories or points regarding genocide. But the most effective strategy is the purposeful creation of misinformation by benefiting from the vast changes in technology and methods of communication in the 21st century. By this, I mean the social media through Facebook, Twitter, and other medium in which the denialists promote their denialist propaganda. The rapid growth of the internet and social media has created new opportunities for fomenters of denial and new challengers for those who seek to contain it. Denialist literature has taken on the outward appearance of legitimate scholarship. It seeks to give the impression of rationality and evidence-based research, undermining scholarship and legitimate research by fomenting widespread skepticism of any, and I quote, mainstream source information. Then you have the rise of right-wing populist government around the globe, which all of these governments contribute and foment denial of genocides. So the book itself is divided into 9 chapters with a conclusion by leading scholar on denialism, Israel Charney. So the first article is about the denial of genocide of indigenous population in the United States, written by Robert Hitchcock, that discusses the way in which denial of the genocide of indigenous population has led to ramifications for the way in which today's governments or administrations have approached and dealt with the native indigenous population. Second article is about the Armenian genocide and its denial, written by Talin Sujan, in which he's the first scholar actually that discusses the way in which subaltern approach, post-colonial approach has also questioned the Armenian genocide under the clout of imperialism, right? So some people would say, well, genocide took place. It was also due to imperial ambitions leading to the genocide. Third article is by our colleague and friend Mark Mamigonian, who discusses the way in which the denial of the Armenian genocide has also hits U.S. courts, weaponizing the First Amendment, freedom of speech. The third article is by Eldad Ben Aharon, who discusses the way in which Israel uses and abuses the Armenian question, the Armenian genocide, to score points with Turkey and Azerbaijan, but also he discusses the way in which the structure of the parliament, of the Knesset, is done in such a way that it would be difficult to pass a bill recognizing the Armenian genocide without the consent of the government. Then we have my colleague here at UNL, Professor Gerald Steinacher's article, Denying the Shoah, Distorting History in the 21st Century. He discusses specifically the way in which anti-Semitism, rise of white nationalism, populism, the QAnon, and other groups have contributed to the dissemination of denial of the Holocaust. And he specifically concentrates on the riots of January 6th, where people were wearing T-shirts saying 6 million Jews were not enough. Then the leading scholar on Cambodian genocide, Ben Kiernan, discusses the way in which denial of the Cambodian genocide in between 1975 and 1979 has contributed to the second genocide between 1991 to 1992, leading to eventually the killing of more thousands of more population within Cambodia. And it discusses the way in which denial has contributed to the to the problem of really bringing the culprits to justice. Then chapter 6 discusses denial of the Guatemalan genocide by another leading scholar, Samuel Totten, in which it deals with the way in which the Guatemalan government dealt with the Itzil people, the indigenous people in Guatemala, who were labeled as leftist and had labeled them as having inclinations towards communism. And they killed about 100,000 of them with the, of course, with the backing of the US administration at the time, the evangelical church. And eventually you see that all these genocides, actually, their denial continues until today. And the 7th article is by Jelena Subotic, in which she discusses the way in which the Republika Srpska and the Serbian government both are embedded in denying of the Bosnian genocide, specifically the massacres that took place in Srebrenica, and eventually also leading to commissions and then denying these commissions to find the truth about what happened in Bosnia. Of course, one important thing we have to think also that denial today has taken a kind of an attire of legitimate scholarship. So you have also reputable publishing houses who are publishing denialist literature under the cover of legitimate scholarship. And this is the topic that Roland Morland actually takes on in discussing the Rwandan genocide. She discusses the way in which one book that was written but published by Penguin Press questioning the Rwandan genocide and blaming the Popular Front, the RPF in committing acts of violence. The last chapter is by Ugur Ungur and Ansar Shahoud, who discuss the way in which the Syrian regime has fomented denialism, has misused, abused the medium of social network in order to promote its denialist approach by calling the others who are defending their rights or are fighting for freedom as terrorists. I mean, all these cases, even the Armenian case in the past, they called them as, they didn't use the word terrorist, they called them as revolutionaries who are, whose aim is to destabilize the country. And last but not least, we have an excellent conclusion by Israel Charney. And the question that Charney asks is the following: what are the psychological meanings and benefits for deniers who face survivors of the targeted victim people? And I'm going to quote him. He says, "The obvious answer is that genocide denial is powerfully satisfying further wishes to be supreme and mock, terrorize, and kill others. As a practicing psychologist for many years, with all my respect and love for human beings and life, I have come to a definite conclusion that these impulses are and always have been built-in or instinctive components of our original basic construction, and that life's challenge is to overcome and rechannel these impulses toward their surprisingly constructive potential for being strong but decent." Then he says, genocide denial is not only strategy against legal consequences and not only pride of membership in the perpetrator group, it is also a powerful protective mechanism on deeper emotional levels to help people, individuals, and people's collective stave off moral qualm, shame, guilt, or responsibility for making amends. Genocide denial helps people to be able to sleep when they have behaved abnormally. In conclusion, there are some major points that this book leads to. First of all, denial of genocides takes place both under and semi-authoritarian regimes. And both regimes have promoted and encouraged denial genocide by their own states. In democratic systems, interest groups and pseudo-scholars have used the right to freedom of speech as a shield in promoting their agendas. Denialists are composed by a strong movement infused with racism and bigotry against the victim group. This bigotry is manifested in anti-Semitism, anti-Armenianism, and Islamophobia, among other types of hatred. Hence, the 21st century denialists do not represent a fringe of society, but have become part of a larger groups that indulge in conspiracy theories and xenophobia. Thank you. This was just a brief introduction. The book goes into much more details, very meticulous details about every genocide covered in the book and its ramifications and the way in which the 21st century has changed the discourse of these genocide by becoming more quote unquote legitimate, by using legitimate means, such as legitimate outlets, websites, but also prestigious presses, sometimes university presses, and journals in order to promote the denialist approach. Thank you, Mark and Christina.
Thank you, Bedross. Again, that is a brief overview of the book, but you certainly get a sense of the scope of the contents, which is quite substantial, and the essays in it, I exempt my own contribution, are very, very valuable. So to start somewhere, Bedross, in the book's introduction, you're very clear that in the case of the Armenian genocide, the Holocaust, indeed, of all the genocides under discussion, and the reference you made to Tallin's essay reinforces this, that denial was an important component of the genocidal process as it was actually occurring. I'd like to ask you to comment further on this, and can we consider also, as we can see perhaps in the current situation in Artsakh, how denial can even precede the genocidal killings and help prepare the way for those killings to take place?
Yeah, of course, in any genocide, denial starts with the perpetration, with the actual planning and the perpetration and perpetrating the genocide. I mean, in the Ottoman case, it's well known that euphemism was used: relocation, deportation, moving you to a better place from the war zone, etc. And then also denying all the cruelty and the crimes that were committed during these deportations, which were by now we know through legitimate scholarship and through extensive research that has been done by scholars, that the aim was to annihilate the Armenians on the route. So denying is an important aspect of the Armenian genocide that began with the beginning of the war, at the beginning of the war, through even using propaganda as a means by issuing specific booklet, which they made a case that the Armenians are desiring to stab the Ottoman Empire in the back, and these are the activities of the Armenian revolutionaries. And as we know, for now, usually the images played an important role during these propaganda, specifically the images that were published in the Harb Mejmuase, in a specific journal called the War Collection, that became the mouthpiece of propaganda for the Ottoman government. And these images actually were fabricated. So basically, if they found actually a few bombs or weapons in some of the cities and brought them to the government center or the police station, then they saw this is not enough for propaganda. So they added to those. If there were like 10% of weapons, they added 90% from their own stash and took pictures and saying that these are the weapons that we found from the Armenian side. They're preparing a major uprising. And of course, the Armenians did have weapons, but it was for defensive purposes. Again, defensive versus offensive. In the case of the Holocaust too, we see propaganda about the Jews, framing the Zyklon B trucks as emergency trucks, hospital trucks, the annihilation centers, the gas chambers as places that you're going to take shower. And eventually all of these are important methods that are used by any genocidal regime in order to cover at the beginning its genocidal intent. So it's a prophylaxis, it's a preemptive attack on to promote its own agenda in a fabricated manner to the international community. Now, today, this is more relevant because the Aliyev's regime has been using the medium of media in order to promote fabricated understanding of what's happening in Nagorno-Karabakh. Before the assault 2 days ago, Aliyev invited all the representative of the diplomats in Baku or embassies, the ambassadors, and told them what's happening, quote unquote, what's happening in Nagorno-Karabakh or Artsakh, and why he's going to do whatever he's going to do. So, and again, denial of Armenian genocide has a strong connection here. If Turkey had admitted acknowledged the Armenian genocide, maybe they wouldn't have even sold weapons to Azerbaijan. If Israel has acknowledged the Armenian genocide, it would have a moral obligation. It wouldn't have sold its military equipment to Baku. And we know that a few weeks ago, major shipments of Israeli military weapons were landed, planes were sent to Ovda airport, and they stashed it with weapons and sent it to Baku to be used in Nagorno-Karabakh. So denial of genocide emboldens perpetrators to perpetrate more acts of violence in a period of impunity at a time in which they have the power. Usually the powerful entity denies the genocide. Weak governments do not deny genocides under international pressure. Strong governments are the governments that deny genocides and use all their capacity, existing capacity, whether it's through their diplomatic channels, whether it's through their university students, scholars, centers, academic centers, culture centers, in order to promote the anti-genocide or contra-genocide, as you call it, Mark, in your article, contra-genocide narrative internationally. This is not endemic only in the Armenian case, but the Armenian case represents the most unique case. Again, there is a government that spends millions of dollars in promoting denial of the Armenian genocide, but we cannot say the same about the Holocaust. I mean, besides Iran or a handful of few governments, there isn't a powerful government that pours money into denying the Holocaust. Similar to that, other cases, despite the fact that there is denial by their own governments, we don't see they are pouring money outside their own countries in order to prevent these countries use the word Guatemalan genocide or the so-called Guatemalan genocide or so-called Bosnian genocide.
This leads to another point, which somewhat overlaps with. You very recently published an article in a special issue of the journal Genocide Studies International that focused on Nagorno-Karabakh and the Lachin Corridor crisis. And the name of your article was Impunity, Lack of Humanitarian Intervention, and International Apathy, the Blockade of the Lachin Corridor in Historical Perspective. First of all, I would highly recommend to any and all people watching to seek out the issue, which has not only your excellent essay, but numerous other important contributions. Your article, to be brief, looks at the three factors of, quote, impunity, lack of humanitarian intervention, and international apathy in the face of the violence against Armenians in the late Ottoman period, including the Armenian genocide, and argues that these factors led to disastrous repercussions for the Armenians today, thereby raising the red flag for potential ethnic cleansing. Obviously, this reflects when you wrote the piece, and I think we can probably today revise that to read almost certain ethnic cleansing and genocide. Can you tell us a little bit more about your article and its thesis and how that dovetails with the work of this book?
Well, unfortunately, Armenian and massacres are endemic in the course of modern history. It's part of the international diplomatic scene in the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. I wanted to look as to what unites all these mass violence, episodes of mass violence, and what are the common denominators of all of these periods of mass violence. Of course, I do not adhere to the continuum process or continuum approach that says that from Abdul Hamid, the desire was to eliminate Armenians, from the region. I argue that every act of violence should be viewed in its specific context. But there are common denominators that unite all these acts of violence, which are also endemic today in the case of Nagorno-Karabakh. I'll start with the first. First is impunity. Both in the Hamidian case, the perpetrators were not punished. In the Adana case, the real perpetrators were not punished, despite the fact that there was a court-martial. In the Armenian genocide, the perpetrators were not punished by the court. They escaped to Berlin, and as we know, many of them were assassinated. The leading people were assassinated by the Nemesis operation run by the Armenian Revolutionary Federation. But there are hundreds of other perpetrators of the Armenian genocide who escaped justice and were also elevated to positions during the Kemalist period, and eventually also were compensated monetarily, financially, with properties too, for their act of valor during the Armenian genocide. So impunity is an important concept in the understanding of perpetration of genocide. It emboldens the perpetrator to commit acts of genocide in an environment of impunity. When you see that no one cares or no one is going to take any steps in order to punish you, or in order to tell you that you have to stop here, this is a red line, the person is going to continue its process of committing acts of violence. The second concept is the concept of humanitarian intervention. Humanitarian intervention entails that the international forces or international community is going to intervene in order to stop massacres or potential massacres. But as we know, during the 19th century, humanitarian intervention came as part of the development of human rights. But humanitarian intervention by European powers was selective. They intervened in the case of Greece, in the case of Crete, in the case of Bulgaria, in the case of Lebanon, but Armenians did not fit that category. Scholars such as Keith Wotempo, Davide Rodogno, Michel Toussaint, Charlie Lederman, and many others have discussed the humanitarian intervention in the 19th century. So basically, the argument is that as long as no one benefits from humanitarian intervention, the intervention is going to take place. Armenian geopolitical, geostrategic position prevented any type of humanitarian intervention because it seems that European powers were not interested in saving the Armenians. Humanitarianism did take place, but humanitarian intervention did not take place. This is in the case of the Hamidian massacres, in the case of the Adana massacres, when thousands of people were on the verge of being massacred, the European ships, the Americans, the British, the French, the Italians, the Russians were in Mersin on the port. They did not intervene with the premises that our intervention might lead to more genocide or more massacres. But they did not intervene, and a second wave of massacres took place. So this argument of not intervening, but saying that by intervention it might lead to more violence, is not endemic, is not applicable to the case of Armenians. Similar to the case of the Armenian genocide. There wasn't any humanitarian intervention. On the contrary, there was false promises given not only to Armenians, to Arabs, to Assyrians, to Kurds, many other groups, saying that join us, we are going to give you an autonomous region. So no humanitarian intervention also leads to important repercussions of committing acts of violence. And finally, apathy. Apathy is kind of acknowledging what's happening. As today, we see a shift in today's media towards the past 2 weeks at least. Armenians are starving in Nagorno-Karabakh, genocide this, genocide that, but useless if you ask me. It's not contributing anything. Hundreds of articles were published in 1894, 1896. Hundreds of articles were published in 1909, if not thousands, in Greek, in Italian, in New Zealand, in New York, in Geneva, in London, but there wasn't any humanitarian intervention. Of course, the idea that these apathetic approaches contributed also to humanitarianism, but not humanitarian intervention. 1915 is the same. Check New York Times. More than 120 articles about the Armenian genocide, Armenian massacres or genocide. Nothing happened. Today is the same, but the difference is that today it was only in the last 2 weeks that the international community shifted, international press shifted to more kind of a positive attitude towards Armenians, towards their suffering, raising alarms, but no measure, nothing happened. On the contrary, if you think about it, the Russian troops, their peacekeeping troops, quote unquote peacekeeping troops, are useless if you ask me. They haven't done anything. On the contrary, they kind of prepared the ground to more offense by Azerbaijani instead of protecting the vulnerable population. As of today, 200 Armenians were killed in Nagorno-Karabakh, but 400 were injured, and 30 or 40 people are missing, including children. So this is the reality. It's part of the cycle, as we can view. It's not something endemic to Armenians. It's part of cycle of a society where its descendants experience the same cycle of violence due to its geostrategic position, due to the fact that they do not have any natural resource to contribute to the international community. Azerbaijan has oil. Azerbaijan plays both sides, funnels the Russian oil to Europe, and also gets positive feedback from European countries for its own natural energy, because Europe needs natural resources such as oil.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a large gap between humanitarian assistance and humanitarian intervention. Could you discuss the relationship between the development of a body of scholarship on genocide, a scholarship to which you've contributed, whether it's the Armenian genocide or other genocides, the development of a literature, of a denialist literature, of literature denying genocide, and now the development of a scholarly literature on denial itself, which the book is a contribution to as well. Anyway, I'm looking, I guess what I'm fishing for is a discussion of the dialectic of the relationship among those three bodies of scholarship. And Christina, I would welcome your commentary as well, because I mean denial in the largest sense, and that includes the denial of cultural heritage, which is an issue that you've been very much involved in. Bedross.
Of course, in all cases of genocides, scholars have been preoccupied by proving that the act that was perpetrated against their communities constituted an act of genocide, all right? And proving this takes ages, decades. The Holocaust, the literature on Holocaust was not written in 1951 or 1952. It took decades until it was crystallized. So basically, I would say that in the Armenian case, people spent so much time just proving that the act that was perpetrated against the Armenians was genocide, had an intent to commit a genocide, regardless of the fact that you do not need a document that tells you that order that tells you send the Armenians to be slaughtered. The whole process itself can indicate that the case was a classical case of genocide. And so eventually, when the Armenian genocide, as well as other genocides, started getting some legitimacy within the international academic world, we have now come a long road from the 1970s to 80s, even in Middle Eastern studies and Ottoman studies, for example, denying of the Armenian genocide was the norm. And today it would be kind of questionable if you deny the Armenian genocide. So, but having said that, with the development, once we have established the basis of the Armenian genocide and its historical veracity, now scholars started looking at denial and why denial is important, specifically in the case of the Armenian genocide, why denial has been advanced as an agenda, why and how denial is being used today, and what should be done in order to combat denialism. Specifically in the 21st century, where access to denialist literature is very easy and is very easy. And it's very easy to convince someone who doesn't know anything about the Armenian genocide by creating this confusion about both sidism, that Armenians say this and Turks say this. Even such a prestigious media outlet such as the BBC still promotes the argument that Armenians say, whereas today within the field of Middle Eastern studies, the majority within the field of genocide studies, there has been consensus that what happened to the Armenians is a genocide. But the real problem is the way in which denialists use the First Amendment in the United States to promote their denialist agenda. Christina?
Yeah, thank you so much, Mark. This is a great question about sort of the cultural heritage, which becomes very inconvenient if you're denying that you killed the people who used it, built it, so forth. Where does it come from? So you have these traces, and Bedross, you just mentioned this Armenians say, and I was reading an article just yesterday in my scramble to read the news and read everything, and it was Armenians say that this is their ancestral homeland about Artsakh, and that was it. And so, you can say that, and what that does is cultivate, doubt. Oh, well, there might be another way to see it. And what that hides, of course, as we know, is all the evidence, the hundreds of khachkars that are inscribed with dates, and the monasteries and all the sites, right, that make up Artsakh. So it's very demoralizing to read that, knowing the kind of corpora we have that attest to Armenian communities in Artsakh. So this is a crazy making problem, because you have this cultural heritage, you have these standing monuments, and then you have the denial that those people ever were there and that we did anything to them. And we've seen how in Turkey, we've seen the narratives develop, for example, at Ani, about the Bagratids. Who are they? They're just people, never using the word Armenian. And now we see, with Azerbaijan, the Caucasian Albanian thesis, as well as complete erasure, going back and forth. And it's a sort of moving target. I think, Mark, you mentioned this idea of sort of like, the wasting of actual scholars' time in trying to disprove things that are so absurd. When we know that experts on Caucasian Albania know that this is a very difficult problem. How do we even understand what Caucasian Albanian architecture is? On the other hand, we have all this evidence for inscribed buildings, Armenian buildings that are clearly connected aesthetically in all kinds of ways to to other historical Armenian centers. This is a huge issue. And unfortunately, I mean, obviously this gets back to Lemkin and issues of genocide and then cultural genocide, then those things become the next, or sometimes the concurrent victims, because they can't be there. Or you have to invent a new history for them. And I am, afraid now we're looking at Ganzasar, we're looking at, some amazing sites within the heart of Artsakh. And so what's now going to happen? This is a question. But these monuments, these lithic sites present a huge problem. They are standing testimonies, and yet, they're supposedly not there, or there's something else.
Mark, just an important addition here. We keep talking about the Turkish government's, role in denying the Armenian genocide, but we are also kind of scholarly community is not paying attention as to what the Azeri government is doing in order to deny the Armenian historical presence and rights through also publishing books with prestigious presses, through their important Nizami Ganjayev Center, for example, in Oxford. So these are also kind of money talks to that extent, and some universities buy into money, and they want these fantastic centers, and usually these denialist approaches come under the cloud of Caucasian studies, kind of Southern Caucasus, kind of inter-ethnic relations, but there is a hidden agenda in it to promote kind of to promote an agenda that denies Armenians both historical rights to the region, but also the obfuscating and fabricating the history of these churches by calling them Albanian churches. And so that's the second. Now we're dealing with two governments here who are, one is denying the Armenian genocide, the other is denying the Armenian historical rights to the region of Nagorno-Karabakh.
Yeah, and of course, not surprisingly, I guess, there is a continuity in some of the same scholar actors who have long engaged in denial of the Armenian genocide, transitioning not necessarily away from that, but to also include supporting the Azerbaijan's denial of Armenian historical existence, essentially. You mentioned, Christina, the fact of the amount of time. Bedross has mentioned this as well, that it takes. There are few things more time consuming or brain and soul draining than responding to denial or trying to debunk denial. It takes a tremendous amount of time and energy and resources, which I would argue and have argued is part of the whole point of it in the first place. If you're preoccupying people with responding to your ridiculous arguments, they are not doing other, let's say, more productive work. As scholars in this field, how do you balance the need to at times respond or at times debunk and at other times look the other way, let's say?
It's a tedious task because you have your own work, you're working on your own thing, and then you come across this denialist thing, which is paper or book, which is really becoming legitimate within these scholarly circles. And what do you do with this? So you have to still write a review about it. It's very time consuming, unless you have an army of scholars whose only task is to combat denialism. All right, but to that extent, I think every scholar should do their part as much as they can in combating denialism within the academic circles. And we are scholars. We cannot, go and take posters and, yell and shout. The only way we can do that is through letters, is through debunking approaches, scholarly approaches to quote unquote scholar approaches to the Armenian denial of the Armenian genocide. And also, trying to spread the knowledge about the Armenian genocide into academic circles, so that specifically when it comes to universities, for example, a lot of universities do not know what the Armenian genocide is about. So they bring a scholar who starts talking about both sidism here and the putting the Armenian genocide under suspicion, or kind of Armenians say, Turks say, etc., without even understanding what's happening. And usually the audience doesn't know anything. So how do you combat this? The only way we do this, I think, through spreading the knowledge, through publishing, and making sure that Armenian genocide is taught at high schools in the country and at universities. But of course, even doing that at high schools creates a lot of problems due to the denialist approach now, as Mark, you wrote in your article, leading to lawsuits, leading to freedom of rights arguments, freedom of speech arguments, and many others. So my understanding is promote knowledge, publish as much as you can, and whenever you can, combat denialism in a scholarly manner.
I should mention that the book started life as it was going to be a conference at your university, which was preempted by COVID, and I'm sure that would have been the first time such a conference on that discussed denial of the Armenian genocide in this kind of context would have taken place probably anywhere, and much less at the University of Nebraska, where there is not an Armenian program, there is an Armenian professor, right?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I would have also expected some backlash, as it happened during the centennial of Armenian genocide, where I organized a major conference, 17 scholars international conference, and I received some backlash from the Turkish Student Association, from Turkish professors, but also from the Turkish consulate in Chicago. So again, the state apparatus actually monitors these activities, and they do use also intimidation of going to lawsuits, etc. But luckily, we have universities backing us. But just writing a letter, for example, to a specific person who is non-Armenian, who is interested in the Armenian genocide, send him a 6-page letter, which a lot of people have received. For example, Deborah Lipstadt, Ben Kiernan, Eldad Ben Aharon, all of these have received these types of, for example, there are dozens of those or hundreds of those, trying to make a case that whatever Armenians are saying is a lie, and there's the other side of it, and et cetera, et cetera. If you really are a weak person and you start thinking that maybe if I work on this, it might bring me to trouble, you would say, I don't want to work on this anymore. I don't need a headache here. So there are ways of intimidating scholars to prevent them to work on this topic, to every time you intimidate someone, every time denialists with the government apparatus or their specific apparatus intimidate someone, they are gaining points in this kind of academic battle.
Yeah, it has a cumulative effect, that's for sure. And this is, I guess, in a nutshell, the argument of my chapter, which is that even though the lawsuit in Massachusetts against the Department of Education and the lawsuit against the University of Minnesota and its Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies, even though those lawsuits failed, and failed rather spectacularly, I'm happy to say, they nonetheless created an atmosphere of controversy around a subject that could and probably has made teachers, administrators, and university administrators look differently at the subject. perhaps as something that they don't want to touch, or that they want to present in a context where both sides are equally represented, quote unquote. So this is a genuine problem. Audience members, I see your questions, and we will get to them, begin taking them now. This is, I guess, a fundamental question, so I want to ask it. What is the benefit of understanding the mechanisms involved in genocide and the denial of genocide when we are witnessing a new attempt of potential genocide in Karabakh? Can you outline the needed efforts to prevent what is taking place currently? Maybe these are two different topics, but I want to pose that existentialist question, basically. How does knowing what we know and sharing what we know matter? This is a bottom line question, and I don't suppose there are good answers, but I wanted to pose the question anyway.
Well, this doesn't mean that Armenians were sitting only and just woke up to yesterday, seeing that there was that the Azerbaijani troops assaulted Nagorno-Karabakh. Armenians have been working this for decades. The Armenian National Committee of America, NCA, the Armenian Assembly, and other education societies are working in order to prevent another calamity to fall on the Armenians of Artsakh. They've been reaching out to international community, to leaders, but unfortunately, the press was reluctant, the press in the international community was reluctant to listen to the Armenians until 2 weeks ago. They were trying to spread the knowledge through conferences, through symposia, through lectures, but everyone fell on deaf ears. Because also Ukraine preoccupies the agenda within the international community. Because of the geostrategic position of Ukraine, because of it's within Europe, because it's a proxy war between the United States and Russia. So what Armenians can do today, I think, is to continue spreading knowledge, is to continue lobbying with their own governments to make sure, to put pressure on the Aliyev's government in order to make sure that the Armenians of Artsakh are going to be treated in a fair way, though I doubt, because if Armenians of Artsakh were living in Sweden or Denmark, I wouldn't have hesitated that their future is going to be grim. But there is Armenophobia, there is hatred of Armenians that have been simmering in Azerbaijan for 3 decades, by which the Aliyev's despotic regime has been using, manipulating, and any of the attendees here today cannot make a sound case that the future of Armenians are going to be flourishing or are going to be positive in this situation. That's why the Armenian government, despite the fact that I don't agree with certain measures it has taken regarding this issue, they wanted international guarantors that the condition of the Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh should be conditioned and should be guaranteed by international community, not by the Russians, which is now the case apparently, so much relying on Russia, not by Azerbaijan, because Azerbaijan has its own internal issues of dealing with its own opposition. Hundreds of people are in the prison, clamping down on freedom of speech. It's a despotic regime, and what do you expect? It's not a democratic regime. So within despotic regime, any ethnic group that does not fit the daily agenda of the government will be subjected to punishment. And this is not only about being an Armenian there. Any other group who could have been in the situation of Armenians would suffer the same way, the same fate. Let alone Armenians who are on the as persona non grata in Azerbaijan. As you know, Armenians cannot enter Azerbaijan, because all Armenians are persona non grata. So the only way I think Armenians can raise their voice, can mobilize their governments, the press, and raise their voice with any type of human rights or criminal acts by the Azerbaijani people towards the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh or Artsakh.
There's a question about the influence of economic interest groups who participate in genocide denial, and the audience member worked on Capitol Hill and saw firsthand how U.S. defense contractors were helping advance the Turkish government's denial. We might update that to include various other groups, including petroleum industry groups that have interests in Azerbaijan. This is a reality of our world, and there are no concomitant, counterbalancing, whatever you want to call it, interest groups who support Armenia. I'm not sure what the question is there, even after I've phrased it, but could you reflect on this, perhaps?
Until 2019, all these interest groups lobbied in order to make sure that the Armenian genocide bill does not pass the Congress. And Greg also knows about this. He asked the question. Massive lobbying took place, but eventually during Biden's period, the House of Representatives, the Senate, followed by President Biden, acknowledged the Armenian genocide. And this was kind of a major victory, maybe symbolic victory, because now whenever you raise the issue of the Armenian genocide, it's kind of, no one will tell you, well, the United States doesn't recognize it as an Armenian genocide. It's a fact now. It's a symbolic fact. But even with all of these efforts, with acknowledging the Armenian genocide, Biden's administration failed to take any measure towards helping Armenians. Of course, the US administration has its own interest. There's no such a thing as humanitarian intervention for the sake of saving Armenians. No one in the course of history intervened to save Armenians, even during the Armenian genocide, during the Adana massacres, during the Hamidian massacres. All the imperial powers were interested in their own national security, with their own interest to score points, and this is what's happening today. The United States did not intervene. Accepting the fact that 1915 was a genocide is not enough, I think, or it was kind of throwing a token to the Armenians, but the real existential threat is today. Armenian genocide was in the past. It happened, we should recognize it, but the real existential threat is today. It's not enough only to recognize what happened in the past. The major question should be, what are you going to do in the present and in the future? And we, as Armenian Americans, urged our administration to take steps, but nothing happened. You saw what Menendez did with the assistant secretary. What's her name? He questioned her, and there was no answer. That the State Department is not interested to intervene. But on the other hand, we see $15 billion have been sent to Ukraine as military aid, as economic aid. So Armenians do not fit the category of the entity that needs to be helped. That has been the situation in the course of history.
The question is, can you point out the earliest written denialist work regarding the Armenian genocide?
The earliest denial work is called The Activities of the Armenians During the War, revolutionary work Ermeni Komitecilerin, the activities of the Armenian committees, Armenian revolutionaries during World War I, which was issued in 1915, actually, on the eve of the Armenian genocide, as a way of propaganda and denying the genocide. So again, denial of genocide does not take place at the end. It also takes place at the time of the genocide. And scholars know when the genocide starts. Scholars debate about genocide start in 1915 or end of 1914 and 1915. But what they don't know when the genocide ended, is kind of a philosophical question too. Genocide still continuing today. As long as there is denial, as long as the state pursues that denial, because not recognizing past injustices also leads to emboldening of perpetrators or their descendants to commit acts of violence against the victim group. So I think that genocide, to a certain extent, is continuing today.
Yes, which actually specifically addresses one or two of the additional questions from the audience about how to characterize what's happening today and the contribution of Turkish and Azerbaijani denial of the Armenian genocide. These are not merely things that happened in the past or refer to things that happened in the past. They are things that are happening in the present and refer to things happening in the present. It's not that the past mandates what's going to happen today, but it certainly influences it, yes? And we're seeing this very clearly and painfully.
Yeah, I mean, for 9 months, Armenians of Artsakh were starving, and any sound scholar will call this genocide by attrition, creating the conditions in which the victim group is going to suffer until you subjugate it. And when that started changing, when international community, after 9 months, international press started condemning the Azerbaijani government of its actions, Aliyev's regime finally initiated an assault as a preemptive attack in order to prevent further, in order to create a status quo, kind of the final, whatever it wanted to achieve, before that criticism gets bigger, before any international power would take substantial measures, which I doubt that anyone was going to take substantial measures. Armenians hoped that maybe United States, Europe was going to come. No one would come. No one is our ally. No one is Armenia's ally. That has been the situation in the course of history. Armenians have to rely on themselves, no one else.
Well, Bedross, Christina, thank you. Bedross, thank you for your valuable work on this book, Denial of Genocides in the 21st Century, and everything else you're doing as a scholar. And I want to thank, again, the Gulbenkian Foundation for their support, and the Society for Armenian Studies, and especially Christina Marazzi, President, for co-sponsoring tonight's event. And I also want to thank the audience for making the time to be with us or for watching the program after the fact. I was going to say in conclusion that there is perhaps value in our being together to commiserate, but I remind myself that the word commiserate comes from Latin, which can mean either a lamenting together or a speech intended to excite pity. And to be honest, I don't have any interest in either of those things. Neither of them will do us any good. Rather, we will do our work, and part of that work is insisting on truth, whether truth in history or truth in the present, or recognizing that they're the same thing. Even in the face of denial and seemingly overwhelming power that insists on lies. We will not stop. We will continue. So I thank you again and wish everyone a good night.
Thank you, Mark.